Okay, well, hello and welcome to our final day of Iowa Ideas In-Depth Week. Thank you all for being here. Iowa Ideas is an event series that explores different topics that are important to Iowans across the state on a variety of category tracks. This week, we are focusing and have focused on agriculture within our new agriculture track with Iowa Ideas, which is exciting. Before we get into introducing our panelists and getting ahead with our session today, we just have a quick sponsor to say thank you to. Thank you to ICT Midwest for their support of this event. Our sponsor support make it possible for these discussions to be free for all attendees. So thank you, ICT Midwest. One other note here before we get started. All attendees will be able to submit questions of their own for our panelists that I will read to them for them to answer. You can submit them through the chat or the question box that should be on your screens, and we will incorporate those into the conversation. So let's go ahead with introductions. Today we'll be discussing the ways that Iowa farmers are getting creative with how they use their land, whether that's edge of field practices to help reduce fertilizer runoff and improve soil health in their fields. And with our panelists, we will explore the effectiveness and the best options for farmers around the state. Just to get started, my name is Olivia Cohen. I'm the Energy and Environment Reporter with the Gazette, and I will be moderating today's session. And for introductions, let's start with Josh. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a row crop and livestock farmer in Belmont, Iowa. North central Iowa, Wright County. We're about an hour north of Ames and an hour south of Albert Lea. I kind of have been a little bit all over the place. In the past, I've raised vegetables, just got out of cattle. I currently finish pigs for Smithfield, but I also raise corn and soybeans along with various small grains as cover crop seed. And some of the stuff that I kind of prioritize with all this is soil health and kind of regenerating the farmland and the landscape. And so most of my ideas on how to use the land has been coming from more of a creative aspect in terms of how to do that, whether it's no-till or strip-till or expanded crop rotations, cover crops, or grazing or anything else like that.
Thanks, Josh. And Aaron?
Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Lehman, and I am a fifth-generation farmer here in central Iowa, just outside of the town of Allman. And I farm with my family, including my son, Benjamin. We grow corn, soybeans, oats, hay, mostly in an organic rotation now, but we have experience in most of our experience, of course, is in conventional rotations, and we utilize a lot of conservation practices on the farm to improve our soil health, our resiliency, and also hopefully we're contributing to a healthy landscape and environment as well as trying to improve our farm. That's a little bit about our farm here. It's good to be here, Olivia. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. And Sean?
All right. Yeah. So my name is Sean Stokes. I have a PhD in soil and crop science. I'm the research director at the Rodale Institute's Midwest Organic Center. And so we have a 30-acre research farm just north of Cedar Rapids. And here we have a couple different research trials going on, one of which is focused on diversifying corn and soybean rotations. So looking at the benefits of adding small grains and other pulse crops or a pasture into a crop rotation, and also looking at the ability to integrate livestock into those rotations and grazing on cover crops, for example. And then we also have research on vegetable production. So we're looking at different tillage management and black plastic mulch use in combination with biochar as a soil amendment to really look at the benefits on soil health, agronomic metrics, crop yield, of course, and then profitability. And those are really what we're looking at in both of those trials. We have a couple different demonstration plots here as well. We have a lot of educational resources looking at different cover crop termination methods and other little seed saving plots. But really our goal here at Rodale and the Midwest Center specifically is to do on-farm research, and then really utilize that research to educate farmers and work directly with farmers who are looking to do things differently, whether that's organic or just adding crop diversity. We have a great team of resources with agronomic consultants and market development teams. And so that team works directly with farmers at their farm. And then we have different educational events here at our farm here north of Cedar Rapids, different farm tours, and we have a field day every year. That field day will be July 8th this year. So really just looking to work with producers as much as possible and help educate where we can.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. Just to get the ball rolling here with our first question, what are some of the biggest challenges that Iowa farmers are facing who want to diversify their farms beyond corn and soybeans? And how can they push through some of these challenges? And anyone is able to start on that one.
Well, it's such a good question, Olivia. I think we were all pausing to make sure that we get started on the right foot. There are a lot of challenges to diversifying farms, and one of the ones that I wanted to make sure I mentioned is that farmers understand that we operate in a very consolidated marketplace, right? There's just a few providers of inputs. There's just a few markets for what we grow, and those players sometimes use monopolistic tactics, so it's very difficult to break in with innovation. So we're in an environment where there are few choices and in the first place. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for farmers trying to diversify, just because the marketplace is controlled, and the options for farmers are fewer because of it. And there are lots of other reasons as well, but I wanted to make sure that we remember that environment that we're operating in.
Yeah, and I'll add to that or expand, I guess. In a lot of places, especially, you go up to my area, it's very dominated by ethanol and by the feed industry, because we've got a lot of large confinement feeding operations up here. So automatically the market is, stacked against people who want to expand beyond soybeans or corn, because they're going to have to haul further, they're going to have to find different markets, or really have to search. And then you've also got the incentive structures, such as crop insurance, the program crops. It limits lending opportunities too, because a lot of lenders will follow you along when you say you've got your plans for corn and soybeans, and then you say, oh, by the way, I'm going to do oats and buckwheat, and they'll kind of look at you like you just said you're going to grow a third arm. And so it requires a level of creativity that I think a lot of farmers aren't willing to, and a lot of risk that farmers aren't really willing to tackle if they're already stretched thin. That said, I constantly think back, and I said this before, but I constantly think back to a quote that my friend Roy Falsgraf told me, that, we're out here fighting over slices of bread when we all live in the bakery. And so it does, while it is a challenge to expand, and we do face a lot of headwinds, we're still technically entrepreneurs and business owners and free market individuals. So complaining that it's hard isn't an excuse for not doing it.
Yeah, and I'll second what they said as well, is that, that's what we hear consistently when we're talking with farmers about crop diversity is the markets and the policies that have kind of pushed the farmers into this corner and leaving them really the two options of corn and soybeans that are, most viable in general. But I think it really speaks to our system right now when we're talking about creative land uses, and the major creative land uses growing something besides corn and soybeans. And it really speaks to kind of the larger problem and the headwinds that they talk about, where 95% of our cropland is dedicated to those two crops. And it really adds to the lack of resilience in the system and the dependence on volatile markets internationally and here, where all of a sudden, if one of those crop prices crashes, farmers are stuck because they don't have a lot of other options. And I think Josh touched on, maybe one of the hopeful points that I see of that all the animal production here and the livestock production, we have our own markets here for growing these different crops. And so all these different small grains, I mean, the rye, the oats, the barley, we have a market for it, and that's the animal feed. And it's about kind of integrating some of those different grains into those rations for pigs, cattle, chickens, whatever it is. And farmers have to get creative and maybe sell to farmers down the street that have those animals, or they keep it on the farm as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to go back to something that, Josh, you mentioned a little bit a few minutes ago about some of the risk that's involved with farmers who may want to diversify their farms more beyond, the typical corn and soybeans. What can these farmers do who want to take that next step? What can they do to mitigate some of those risks?
In my case, I've raised oats, buckwheat, cereal rye. I do about 80 acres of cereal rye a year. But if you're not, in my mind, there's two things that you need to do. If you're going to do something that's a little bit unconventional, you need to find a market and get a contract. So if there's a buyer out there for oats, you need to get that in writing that they're going to take it, or you've got to have them guarantee a secondary market. Because one example is that we've got grain millers here in St. Ansgar, and it's one of the largest oat millers in the state, and the other one being Quaker Oats in your area. But they technically buy a lot of Iowa oats, but the majority of what they buy comes from Canada. And they tell us up and down that it's cheaper and that we can't meet grade, but yet they're buying Iowa oats, and I know plenty of people that can meet the grade. However, Canada's got dry weather in the prairie provinces, and they don't tend to have as much humidity. So if a issue arises where we can't meet grade, a lot of times, you drive all the way up there with 1,000 bushels of oats, and they reject it out of hand, and you've got nowhere else to go. So you need to have that secondary market, whether it's feed for livestock or whatever. And then you also got to start small, because we're still, farming and raising stuff, but small grains requires a different set of skills than corn and soybeans. It's not completely foreign. It's not like we're out here growing tobacco or something, but it does require a different set of skills. And so you need to kind of be able to fail small. And so the first year that I raised oats, I did it on 20 acres. And I kind of expanded from there. The first year I did cereal rye, same deal, 25 acres. Buckwheat was 25 acres. And now I've got the confidence to raise it on a larger scale. But you also, you've got to be able to fail small, so you don't run the risk of, jeopardizing your whole farm because you got to take all.
Yeah, Josh is absolutely correct. It's important to scale your enterprises so they fit within your farm's goals, your family's goals, in your community's goals, to be honest. So I think being creative about the markets that might be available to you and doing a lot of research is really important. So I agree completely with Josh there. I also think that it's important for us farmers to work together to try to find these solutions. We pride ourselves on being very innovative, very gritty, and you got to be in order to farm, right? That is essential for every farmer out there. But we can't let that stop us from working with one another to say, hey, if we work together, maybe we can access this market, or maybe we can do this processing, or maybe we can find a better source for this input. We got a lot of history of doing that in Iowa with our cooperative nature that we have here in the upper Midwest. But we got to remember that we got to go back to work with one another sometimes when we need to pool our knowledge and resources to do a better job of those things. But Josh's point is very well stated as well.
I think we're pretty bad about sharing too. Like, we did have the cooperative system, but since that kind of matured, we forgot that that's how we used to learn things. Is we talk to our neighbors, and now our neighbors are trashing us for being different.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a challenge. I mean, there's the social pressure in farming that's very unique to, that work in a way that other places don't necessarily have. But I think it's also the benefit too of that farmer to farmer cooperation is a huge part of it in that knowledge base. And I think that's what we try to offer here at our center is really this just hub of education and resources to connect people together across the agricultural spectrum, demonstrate a bunch of different crops that we're growing here and show how it can be done. And then they can take that small step forward, and maybe it's just 20 acres of oats, or transitioning to organic where you're only transitioning a small amount of the farm. I think a lot of people think it's an all or nothing approach. I think with any of this creative land use, you start small and you build on those successes, and then if you do fail, you can reevaluate and fail small, like he said. I really like that. And learn from that. I mean, failure is just a learning opportunity. You just don't want to put too much risk into that failure. And I think there's a great example happening now. I think it's near Albert Lea. There's that new oat processing plant that's opening up. And that's a great example of farmers really cutting out the middleman. I think it's mainly farmer investors or some other investors there that farmers are buying into this new plant. They're guaranteed a good price on those oats. And I think that could really be a model for the way we can see these markets develop in the future, is that farmers have a little more buy-in and investment and are seeing more money from that product that they're selling because they're also invested in that plant a little bit as well. But I think another way to look at it is I totally agree that there's risk here, but if we can get over that hump of risk to get into this crop diversity, we're then de-risking everything, because by adding in this crop diversity, we're adding resilience into our system. We're diversifying our labor. We're taking less risk with all of this as well by adding that diversity. And it's not just crop diversity, it's diversifying time. We were talking about weather conditions and how, this spring might be really wet like last year, and now you have a week to do everything you need to do. But if you've planted a small grain in the fall, you've now taken some of that off of your plate already because it was good in the fall and you planted that winter grain, and now you have less work to do in that limited window.
I think, playing off that, we don't talk very much. Like, every time this discussion comes up, whether it's no-till or cover crops or diversifying, it's always, how do you manage risk of diversifying or doing this new thing? But we don't ever really talk about the risk of the system as it is. Yeah. Because, I was thinking about it when Sean was talking, that by concentrating ag the way that we have so severely, it really puts a lot of pressure on the existing acres to produce and produce more, because there's always this tension between input prices, land prices, everything else. Last year in this area, it was over $1,000 an acre to raise corn. And if you didn't produce, which a lot of guys didn't because we got an exceptionally wet May, you're backwards. And so I know a lot of guys that lost a lot of money last year just raising corn and soybeans, but that's not a discussion we ever have. You don't talk about when you put a bunch of compaction down deep because you had to make that last pass of tillage in the spring before you planted, versus a strip till or no till, or maybe even just having that ground be a small grain and giving it a chance to rest. So that's my soapbox moment here.
But Josh is very right. We need to redefine what it means to handle risk. And we're not only at risk when we have a system that's not diverse. We're not only at risk for weather conditions and climate issues. We're used to, farmers understand that, but we're experiencing right now a trade policy that puts us at risk when we have so much at risk because we're so much is in our export basket. It's easy to retaliate against us. So the marketplace, when it's not diverse, also puts it at risk. It puts it at risk of political and trade winds that might blow in the wrong direction one year to the next. So that's another reason why thinking of ways to be diverse helps us mitigate the risk that's inherent in just a two crop system.
Yeah, and I think one way to think about it too is, you ever talk to any sort of financial advisor, financial person, they're going to say like diversify your portfolio investments, diversify where your money is sitting, and it's no different than on a farm. You're diversifying your crops, you're diversifying your income stream so that if you take a hit on one, it's not 75% or 100% of that is being damaged. You're now taking a hit just on 25% of it potentially, but you still have other options that are still viable in that year. Or if you have some type of insect pressure, or there's any sort of weather event that might impact one thing specifically, you're not just all in on that, and you're really diversifying that risk. And I think that's a key point. And I think part of it too is, I think there's a misconception about growing small grains, because a farmer is going to take this, a lot of farmers are going to take this year by year approach and look at that 1 year of small grains and go, I'm only getting a few bucks a bushel for my oats or small grain, and I'm not really making a lot of money that year compared to if I just grow corn or soybeans, which seems to be more profitable. But you really have to take a step back and really look at the big picture of the crop rotation, because if you're adding in that small grain, maybe it looks less profitable in that year, but then it leads to input reductions in the corn and soybean year. So now if you're putting less money into the corn and soybean year because of that third or fourth crop, you're now actually making the whole rotation more profitable. And I think that sometimes you really have to take a step back and look at that big picture, that farm level view, that rotation level view, and not get too caught up too much in just that 1 year. Obviously, there can be some cash on hand issues with the way the system is set up, but I think we really, got to take that step back sometimes.
And Dr. Stokes is right. What we need to start exploring then to get to that point is saying, hey, do our lending practices take this into account that encourage diverse practices? Do our crop insurance products encourage that diversity that will lower risk overall? Will our farm subsidy programs encourage that diversity so that it reduces risk for the system overall? There's lots of ways that we can support diversity, wherein sometimes farmers feel penalized if they're doing a diverse operation. And instead, we should be rewarding those folks who are taking the steps to diversity that are helping make our whole system more healthy.
Well, thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for that. We have a question submitted through the chat here that I'll read verbatim. One attendee is asking, a creative land use is agrivoltaics, which is the dual use for land for both solar electric production while continuing to farm the land in some way. Please ask the panelists about their thoughts on agrivoltaics. So that's a question that's a little bit broad there. So feel free to take that in any way that you would like to answer it. And would one of you like to start?
Yeah, I'll start with that because I think it comes back to one point that we've kind of already talked about of some of the social pressure. I think there's some really interesting polarization when you talk about using solar or putting solar on agricultural land, that it's frowned upon in a lot of circles. And I think that getting through that can be part of it. But there's a lot of benefits to putting in solar and then grazing something like sheep underneath or something small. I think it's a little more challenging with cattle. You can grow vegetables under the agrivoltaics, but I think it's the creative land use, the multiple uses of the land that are really beneficial. And I think with so much ethanol production in this state, there was an interesting statistic I saw that it takes 100 acres of ethanol to produce the same amount of energy as 1 acre of solar. And so it's really utilizing the same process to take the sun and turn it into energy. But ethanol is a very inefficient form of that, but it's very accepted now. And so I think that that's something, a more efficient use of that land, if we're talking about energy production, is something like agrivoltaics. And it doesn't just have to be energy production. You can utilize agriculture and grazing under it. And it's really beneficial for the forage that's growing underneath it when there's a little bit of shade in there. And those systems really work well together.
I mentioned him earlier, but my friend Roy Falsgrass is in Puxton, Colorado, and they've been playing with agrivoltaics on his farm. First, they set it up as a shelter belt, and so during certain times of the day, the panels will fold up and block the wind because they are on they've got a steppe climate there, so it's dry, hot, windy constantly. So they're able to capture energy and then also use it as a way of retaining moisture because they're blocking the wind. Roy wants to take it to a next level where he basically is alley cropping in between rows of these agrivoltaics, and so he'll raise a whatever crop. He's got like 18 crops he raises on his farm, but he wants to be able to alley crop it so he can take a 40-foot stripper header or a platform header and go in between the rows, and that way he can basically double the income that he gets off an acre, because he's getting basically 2 crops. He's getting the sun and the row crop itself, or the grain.
Aaron, do you have anything to add for that question?
No, this is just such an excellent example of how we can be creative with our land use, and find ways to diversify our economy while we're doing it, while using creative land use. So we need to be careful that we don't be so protective of one commodity over another that we limit the innovation that can take place on farming like agrivoltaics is.
Just pivoting a little bit here, I'm curious to know a little bit more about, what role does policy play when shaping land use decisions for farmers? And what changes would help encourage farmers to diversify their crop rotations more?
I think there are a lot of ways that we can do a better job with policy that encourages diversity and creative land use. We've talked about some of them already, but crop insurance is a big factor in a lot of land use decisions in Iowa. So I think we can start there. For farmers who are using diversity on their farm, they find it more and more difficult to access good crop insurance, and that's ironic because the very thing that those diverse acres are doing is reducing risk. So why shouldn't our crop insurance and our risk mitigation system actually encourage diversity? But it becomes harder and harder to use as farmers become more diverse. Now we're getting better, right? We're making better crop insurance products for diverse farms, but we're not there yet to make them very, very useful for us. So that's one example. Crop insurance modifications and improvements could do a lot to encourage diverse and creative land use.
Yeah, I'd second that idea because I feel like every time we increase the subsidy for crop insurance or we roll out some sort of new program that is intended to mitigate risk for the covered crops, whether it's corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, whatever, you just end up getting more of that. and it's more intense. Like, you know, if you got a product out there that's going to cover 95% of your revenue on an acre for corn, that's going to automatically discourage anything else from going on that acre, because the farmer can look at that essentially like a put. You know, they've got a floor in place because they bought this product that Farmers Mutual Hail offers or whatever. So if there was, you know, maybe less focus on the amount of the subsidy, but the quality of the subsidy and the things that it's subsidizing, because currently, you know, if you take prevent plan on an acre, if it rains too much up here, guys will frequently have 10 or 15, 20 acres that they can't plant, and they'll just take a prevent plant claim on it and let it sit idle for a year. And then their only cover crop on there becomes water hemp and lamb's quarter.
Right.
And so I'd love to see more conservation compliance requirements in there. I would love to see a discount schedule for, you know, risk resilience. So if you've got a more resilient farm because you're practicing rotations, you're spending less money on your crops, you're seeing better yields by taking that year off of the corn and soybean rotation, then you ought to be rewarded for good management rather than punished by not being able to insure it. You know, that's a constant conversation that we have up here among the more open-minded farmers is how do you make crop insurance work better for the people that are actually trying to reduce the amount of time they spend with their crop insurance adjuster? Because some of these really big farms out here just treat crop insurance as another revenue tool. It's not insurance in the traditional manner. It's a line item on their balance sheet that they expect to get next year.
Yeah, this is a challenging one. It feels just so tough to go against the headwinds, and I think a lot of these entrenched subsidies and the money that goes into ag is really just, supporting those entrenched big ag interests. I mean, the chemical companies, the seed providers, like that's a big part of why we're here. I'd love to see the system get flipped on its head a little bit and really start to, if you're going to subsidize some part of it, let's subsidize the end of it. Like let's have farmers grow food and get rewarded for the true cost of growing that food, and subsidize the end product and not really just get it. So we're so entrenched in growing just a few of them, broaden some of the crop insurance and be a little more flexible when you're allowing cover crops and different types of crops to be grown. But I think it's really the big challenge, and it's really why our system is where it's at right now. And sometimes the best we can do is just give some research and education and provide some data behind why there's different ways that are better to try to help, provide a more scientifically sound argument when people like Aaron are, working towards policy with his work and trying to influence some of those government factors. But that's those policies have pushed farmers into a corner. And I think everything we talk about is, and I never blame the farmers. I blame the policy that has kind of forced them there and given them these safety nets to kind of entrench this current system that we have.
There's a lot to the policy piece as well. The education efforts we need to have in place to have creative land use and more diversity on our landscape is essential policy. There's some great educational groups out there working to their hardest to make that happen, to provide better resources to farmers and the community so that we can have better choices and better knowledge about that. And this is what the Rodale Institute does with Dr. Stokes too. It's so important to have good education pieces out there as well. And we can't forget, we live in an economy that is very much controlled top down. And if you aren't, you have to make sure that there's opportunities for everyone in that system. And that means enforcing your antitrust laws and making sure that all those things that can reward innovation in the marketplace, reward people who are being innovative on their farms, can actually thrive rather than being throttled by that. So policy goes from those big important pieces all the way down to the education we're seeing we're talking about on our farms.
Kind of continuing on that point, Aaron, you mentioned the economy. Given the current economic climate, how can farmers balance both sustainability while maintaining financial viability on their farm?
Well, I think it is a challenge. That's the big question that we're facing. And we talked earlier about the need to look at an approach that can be sustainable for your farm in the long term, and that means not only for your farm ground, but also for your farm economy, your local farms resources. Trying to figure out that balance so that your farm can be more resilient in the future is the big key. And those decisions are made on a daily basis for every farmer trying to think about what investment can make a real difference in my farm in the long term. What do we need to do to make sure that we can make a good growing season decision at the same time?
Yeah, and I think if we're getting over the first challenge of the markets and the problems with that is obviously the first hurdle. If we can get past that and have the crop diversity and we're building soil health, sustainability and profitability are not exclusive from each other. Sustainability and improving soil health makes the farm more profitable. And I think that some of the research we're doing here is relatively new. We don't have a good long-term data set yet, but Iowa State has two excellent research projects that have been going for 25 years with the Marsden Farm with Matt Liebman and some of Kathleen Dellett's work that have looked at long-term benefits of improving soil health through the crop diversity by adding in a small grain or a pasture year, and showing how by building soil health, we're reducing inputs and maintaining, if not increasing, that profitability. And I think that's the key point, is we can do both of these at the same time. And it's just a matter of kind of getting over that initial hurdle. And then when we're doing that now, for example, like Matt Liebman's project with the Marsden Farm showed that by building soil health, not only did you maintain profitability, but now they're applying 90% less synthetic nitrogen and pesticides. They're reducing toxicity in the water. We're reducing nutrient leaching. So not only are we improving our profitability, improving our soil health, we're improving our communities. We're reducing the amount of nitrogen that's going into our waterways and some of that runoff that's polluting our waterways and our local drinking supplies. We're reducing chemicals in the environment, and it's disturbing the second highest cancer rate in the country that Iowa has. And so I think a lot of this stuff all is interconnected, and that I think there really is a good viable path forward. And Iowa State has shown some of that great research, and that we're trying to show a different version of that to really put as much data and science behind it, so we can really have these data-based conversations and show policymakers, farmers, the average citizen that there is a path forward, and it's not doing it at the sacrifice of an economically viable system.
I think one of the hardest truths that farmers have to face is that yield does not mean profitability. And it's the conversation that I have constantly, like even among people that I thought were pretty far down this path for soil health and resilience or regenerative sustainability or whatever buzzword you want to use. When we come to the discussion of, say, like no-till soybeans, they're like, well, I'm going to lose 5 bushel on my beans if I don't at least make a strip till pass. And then you got to sit down and figure out how much is your time, how much is that equipment cost, how much is the diesel or whatever, like there's real costs to these things. Just because you got 5 bushel more, did you make more money? Was it worth that 5 bushel? Because last year, I had a lot of different things that I did. I had a couple fields where I cut back dramatically on my chemical and my fertilizer use compared to my uncles and my neighbors. And despite the heavy rainfall we had, I was able to match the highest yield among my family members with 2/3 of the nitrogen, with 1 strip till pass throughout the entire year for corn. I planted it into a 11-way diverse corn crop mix. I was able to only do in-season applications of nitrogen, either on the planter or with a Y drop, and I didn't use any dry. My tissue samples never showed that I was deficient in anything, and I was still able to, match the highest yield. And that's against the field that got hog manure and got a Y drop pass of UAN and got all sorts of different in-season applications and fall applications of manure or nitrogen or what have you. So and that was also ripped and field cultivated and then field cultivated again. It's like, the fact of the matter is much like Sean said, sustainability and profitability aren't, mutually exclusive. A lot of times when you go into these systems, as we've all found out, you get a third crop in there, you can actually reduce the amount of money that you're spending on your subsequent crop. And a lot of times that carries over to, say, like soybeans. So if you've got a 3-crop rotation of oats, corn, and soybeans, all 3 of those crops are eventually going to be cheaper. And in some cases, that small grain might be more profitable than the other 2, despite the fact that it yields less because you're spending a whole lot less on raising the crop. And it's really difficult to get people to understand that paradigm, because we've been taught through every farm magazine and every extension agent out there and commodity orgs, what have you, that yield is the only way that you make money. And it's just not true.
Kind of continuing down this path here, there's another question that came into the question box, and this attendee said, shouldn't we start talking about net profit per acre instead of bushels per acre? Yield leads to bad decisions. Do any of you 3 have any thoughts or comments on that?
I would say Josh just kind of answered that question. I mean, I think we're too focused on quantity when we need to be focused on quality of these systems. And organic is another example of this as well, as it's a way to add a premium and add some profitability to that. Organic has its challenges, of course, and maybe it's not for everybody, but the goal is to let's get as much money per acre, and it doesn't necessarily mean the highest yield. It's the combination of income and expenses. If your income maybe drops a little bit because your yield dropped a little bit, well, maybe that's a result because your expenses were now half, and so you're actually more net money per acre, just like Josh was saying. And that's the paradigm shift. It's that we need to start thinking about that profitability per acre, whether that's organic or some other way, and not just be focused on, bragging at the local coffee shop that I got 300 bushels an acre, but I also put 300 pounds of nitrogen on my plants to get it there. And so that's the shift that needs to happen. And it's discussions like this that, really are hopefully encouraging that mindset.
Yeah, I think the yield discussion is particularly risky because it leads to what I've heard a lot of people jokingly refer to as the moron approach, as in like what Sean just said. If we've got to get more corn, then we need to put more nitrogen on, then we got to put more potash on. We got to treat our soil like it's a growing medium, and then 2 passes of fungicide, 3 passes of herbicide, tillage, whereas when you look at your system a little bit differently, like organic forces you to, you start to approach things differently, and you kind of realize that in a lot of cases, less is more. You put less nitrogen on, your soil, your plants, everything else starts to function better. I like to joke with people that I talk to about this stuff that a lot of times nitrogen is like drinking too much Mountain Dew or drinking too much coffee or whatever. Eventually you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. You drink too much Mountain Dew, you start to feel sick. And then that leads to all sorts of other problems in the system. And that's what we got now is sick soil. Things aren't working the way that they're supposed to because we focus almost exclusively on the chemical side. Whereas, that's oftentimes not a guarantee for success, not at peak levels. And you could probably replicate that exact same success by just cutting back.
Yeah, less chemicals and let the biology of the soil do the work for you. If you set them up to succeed, those microbes in the soil, they work for free and they will do the nutrient cycling and they'll build the soil health in a way that is so beneficial to the whole system. And I think Josh touched on a key point that using just soil as this medium to grow it, like our system is really set up and has really lost sight of what farming is at its core, that our farming system now is closer to mining. It's about resource extraction. I want to get the most out of this soil at the expense of everything else, when it's lost sight of the land stewardship that's such a key component of it. When we start to embrace that stewardship of our land a little more and really build the system holistically and improve the health, we see these benefits to every other aspect of it as well.
And we don't think it leads us to think in a very limited tunnel vision way where, friends of mine in this area constantly talk about some of these guys, but one of our favorite things to do, and it's probably not very kind, but we send each other pictures on social media about what the ditches look like when the snow melts. And there's an awful lot of ditches in this area that are pretty black right now, with $10,000 an acre soil that's being blown off and going other places, sometimes to my field. So thank you to all my neighbors. But it's kind of this reductivist approach to looking at things as what we do to affect that crop, when really we're only 5% of the management. When you look at everything that Mother Nature throws at it, everything the soil throws at it, we can only influence so much. If we quit managing or quit looking at that crop, it's not going to die tomorrow. It's still going to grow. It'll still be there, but we just need to understand that we can work with outside forces, and it's not us and Corteva guaranteeing that our crops are going to survive.
Do you have anything to add on that front, Aaron?
No, I think that Josh and Sean have really said it in a very articulate way. And, I think we just need to remember, that these are system discussions, and that too often farmers are just left with too few of good choices. And unfortunately, that leads to some system breakdowns overall. So I think presenting the options for farmers that can be profitable, can be worthwhile, that are good for your farm and your community, that'll lead us to real changes on individual farms. And unfortunately, when we limit our choices, we're limiting innovation, we're limiting our long-term success. So but I think that's Josh and Sean have said it very, very well.
Kind of going off that point you just made about farmers having fewer choices now. Going off of that, how can Iowa farmers select one of these practices that would be right for them and their farms? What are some ways they should go about making that choice?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there's all sorts of ways to do it. And Josh, you highlighted a few of these things when you started our conversation today. One thing I like to remind people of, and that the Farmers Union likes to remind people of, here we are in the breadbasket of our country and the breadbasket of the world. Yet of all the food we eat here in Iowa, less than 10% of that comes from Iowa. And that doesn't make any sense. We are in such a productive place. We have such innovative farmers. Why can't our system do a better job of feeding us and our communities? So one way that a lot of farmers have gotten to the point where they can find good alternatives, good ways to bring innovation to their land, creative land use, is by getting involved in the local and regional food system and producing food that can be grown for their neighbors, for their consumers in their community, for their schools, for their other institutions. And the system isn't set up for that in nearly a sophisticated way. But there are investments that have been made, and we need to build off those investments. They're at risk right now, but they have great results. They have great results bringing fresh food to our community. So that's one idea about how we can do a better job of allowing farmers to connect with their community.
Yeah, one thing we talk about that's kind of similar to that point, and that Josh kind of talked about the different buzzwords, and like regenerative agriculture is one of those buzzwords. But when you talk about regenerative agriculture, it's not just about regenerating the soil and regenerating, that farm. A lot of times when you make these systems more profitable through regenerative agriculture, you're talking about keeping more money in the community. You're talking about regenerating rural communities because you're keeping more money in there. You can maybe deconsolidate some of these farms where instead of 5-10,000 acre farms in a region, you can really break that down and have more farmers that are then contributing more to that community and bring back even the processors, the elevators, deconsolidate really the whole ag supply chain that, now you're bringing back jobs and money into these places that are really seeing an exodus from our rural communities because it's just a couple farmers in these areas. And so I think that's the big picture view as we're talking about profitability and some of that, there's just so much more to this systems approach. And it's, really making our whole state and community more sustainable in that sense. And it's mind blowing to me that we have food insecurity issues and are importing 90% of our food in a state that is some of the best farmland in the world. Like if that doesn't speak to how broken our system is, I don't know what does.
Yeah. As far as how farmers can get involved, there's Aaron's group, Iowa Farmers Union. Practical Farmers of Iowa has done an excellent job of connecting people to different resources. They're not a advocacy organization in the policy sense, but they do advocate for a lot of systems change and creative ways of handling the land that we have here. But beyond that, they have, facilitated a lot of new markets, whether it's through cover crop business accelerators. That's kind of how I got into raising cover crop seed, or what's going on with this oat mill that Sean mentioned. The gentleman who started it farms about 11 miles from me and called me. I was probably one of his first phone calls when he came up with the idea, because he said he needed to find other crazy farmers in the area to talk to. And it's been exciting to see how that snowballed from one guy being frustrated with the lack of progress on the oat front because he was raising oats for grain millers, to now having millions of dollars raised, a huge portion of that being farmer investors, thousands of acres potentially affected in 2 different states, and having that ripple effect that Sean and Aaron talked about, where now this opens up opportunities for people to try other things. It's an opportunity for farmers that used to raise oats or never raised oats before to try and plant a few acres, harvest it, and take it up to Landon in Albert Lee, and then come back with cattle or sheep, or maybe get really crazy and plant another crop right after that and harvest that. And beyond that, I think it kind of opens the door to the possibility that maybe you're going to plant something like wheat after your oats come off, because that opens up the door for fall planted crops. And really, that's the type of thing I would love to see more of. I would love to see more oat mills in central Iowa. I would love to see more cereal rye grown, or more anything, really, just anything besides corn and soybeans, because when land is this expensive and it's this profitable, it seems just ridiculous to have it only be limited to 2 crops.
Thank you to the 3 of you. Just keeping an eye on the clock here, we have about 6 minutes left of our session today. So for one last question, as we wrap up, and to also end on a more positive note, I want to ask you both, or the 3 of you, what are you optimistic about going forward?
Well, I'll start right I'll start right there. Despite all the challenges that we have, despite folks trying to divide us, I find a lot of optimism from finding so many people who really want to get involved in agriculture, who want to become a farmer, whether it's a farmer in their own community growing food for their own community, or becoming part of a farm that's growing commodities. The number of people who are smart, innovative, driven, gritty, and collaborative, and want to be a part of their community, who want to get involved in agriculture, is really encouraging to me. And if we can find ways to put all that great energy, all that great innovation to good use, I think we will be just fine in the long run. And that's kind of a challenge for for all of us, is to put all that great thinking towards a better agriculture system.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next here. And so I think of two things here that make me optimistic. And I think the first is that a big part of what we do is just working with so many farmers across the state. And, our team does that as well. And we just consistently hear that farmers want to diversify. They're not resistant to this concept. It's that first challenge that we talked about of the markets. That's the hurdle that a lot of them need to get over. But they're not going, oh, I just want to grow corn and soybeans. They need to think realistically about making money to feed their families and to keep their land. And that's the first hurdle. So we can get over that. Farmers are going to diversify. And that's what makes me optimistic, is that everyone sees the writing on the wall that this system is not sustainable, and we want to do it, but we need to do it in an economically viable way, and start having more of these viable grain markets that are really that first entry point into some of these more regenerative practices. And I think something that Aaron said kind of made me think about it too, that there's so much polarization in this country right now that I'm optimistic about just agriculture being that common ground that we all have. And that's the topic that brings everyone together. We all want good, healthy food. We all want healthy communities. We want clean air. We want clean water. All of these things intersect in agriculture. And I think that's something where all of us can really find that common ground to move forward into a system that's benefiting everyone.
Yeah, I just kind of echo the same thing those Aaron and Sean just mentioned, because it seems like there's a lot of criticism you hear constantly about these different cropping systems. And I think, oddly, I find that to be a positive, because it means they're responding to the growing interest in the no-till, the strip-till systems, the organic, the diversified crop rotations, because there is a tremendous amount of growth and interest. Several years ago, it was just kind of a dead subject. You're an oddball if you're growing this stuff yourself. And now people will drive by and they'll see what you're doing in that field and call you up and say, hey, I got a question about oats, which is really comforting, because they're at least thinking about it in an open-minded way, instead of calling you up saying, hey, you got weeds in your field and you need to take care of them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to the three of you for your time and insight this afternoon. And thank you to all of our attendees who joined us virtually today for this great discussion. I want to note that replays of this recording, as well as the other sessions from earlier this week, will be available, and we will have them on the Iowa Ideas website, which is iowaideas.com/replays. So those will be available to go back and be rewatched. Also, this is the first of 3 in-depth weeks that we'll be having this year as part of Iowa Ideas. So don't miss the in-depth weeks. That is May 12th through 16th, covering cancer in Iowa, and August 11th through 15th, covering energy and environment. And also a note that our 2-day full conference will be occurring on October 2nd and 3rd of this year. So mark your calendars. Quick thank you again to ICT Midwest for sponsoring this event. Thank you all again so much for attending this panel, and hope you have a great weekend. Thanks so much.